Hi, welcome to this Physionic extract, wherein I'll be showing you a bit of data on how creatine may have a positive impact in protecting the brain from secondary injury that is caused by traumatic brain injury that you might sustain from something like a contact sport like football.
Learn Your Body, a science-based education.
Now, this particular research comes from a paper that I dissected, and you can check out those more detailed notes on the experimental methods, experimental design, and things of that nature, as well as the actual data itself. I've got notes on that as well, which I won't necessarily go over in this particular piece of content. All of that is linked, however, to this content, so I encourage you to check that out. So the research essentially shows that in mice as well as in rats with the consumption of creatine or the injection of creatine, there is a protective effect of creatine in terms of the morphology of the brain. So these rats and these mice had damage done to their brain, so blunt force trauma was caused to their actual head, and then they were either killed right away to immediately measure the effects, or they were kept alive for 7 days. Of course, they were taken care of so that they didn't feel substantial pain, but after those 7 days, then the brains were collected. And then they took a bunch of microscope images and they compared the amount of damage, the amount of trauma that occurred in the vehicle condition. The vehicle condition is the mice and the rats that had no creatine supplementation compared to various time points of creatine supplementation. If that was 1 day, if that was 3 days, 5 days, and in the rats they did 4 weeks of creatine supplementation. And as you can see that there's far less damage that occurs to the brain with creatine supplementation. Now, interestingly, the researchers also wanted to find out what was one of the mechanisms, what might be one of the mechanisms for how creatine is protecting the brain. And it seems that they believe that the mitochondria of the cells of the neurons is leading to a swelling of that mitochondria. When trauma occurs, you have primary trauma, you have the primary attack, the primary point of damage, and that leads to a bunch of neuronal death just because of the impact itself. Now, hours, days, months later, you can have secondary trauma wherein the cells that weren't immediately killed are kind of teetering between death and between life, and those cells tend to die off. So they end up undergoing what's called apoptosis, where they die off. And that can be caused by a swelling of the mitochondria. So then they tested the mitochondria themselves, and they found that creatine seemed to, through an unknown mechanism, seems to protect the mitochondria and lead them to not die off as quickly and have a more robust protective mechanism of the cells themselves. And that's why we see increases in brain matter in the mice and in the rats that consumed or were injected with creatine. So really fascinating study. Now, of course, the mechanism isn't clear, but it is clear that creatine supplementation does seem to have a positive impact in terms of protecting the brain mass. Now, in terms of functional outcomes, do these mice and rats behave better than the vehicle rats and mice? Well, we don't exactly know that because, well, they killed these mice to get the actual brains. But that would probably be another study that they would need to do from here on out. But it seems like it would be a good idea based off of just this study. Now, we would need more research to look into this, but based off this study, it seems like it might be a good idea to supplement with creatine monohydrate in this particular situation, because that would have a protective effect on the brain, especially for athletes or really anybody that undergoes TBI or traumatic brain injury. With that said, that's where I'll leave it. Of course, check out my notes, which are far more detailed. You can check out the study itself, which I certainly encourage. And with that said, I hope I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with you in the next one. Have a good one, guys. Bye.